Today, guys, we are finally looking at the new hunter exotic for this season, Triton Vice. Now, what I'm about to say is going to turn a lot of you off, but I do believe it's worth considering. Now, this exotic is a Glaive specific exotic. I know, half of you already clicked away right now. Now, granted, most of my Glaive builds have been nerfed, considering Synthoceps got nerfed last season. We literally have a day of mourning for all of our previous Glaive builds, but this season, we have a new exotic. We also have Unstoppable Glaive on the artifact. But the question remains, does Triton Vice actually make Glaives meta? Now, first up, it comes with the exotic perk, Halberdier's Reach. This increases Glaive reload speed and melee damage when surrounded. Now, Glaive melee final blows overflows a round to the magazine, and Glaive projectile final blows detonate if the Glaive deals damage matching your subclass type. Now, first, let's talk about the increased melee damage portion. From our testing, this is a 30% increase in damage for your Glaive melee damage while surrounded, which does seem pretty similar to that of literally the surrounded perk, where you need to be within 8 meters of 3 or more enemies. Now, how does this compare to, say, something like Synthoceps? Now, even though Synthoceps with Glaives are nowhere near as potent as it once was, even Synthoceps provides a 50% damage to our Glaive melee damage. There are a few other things to note, though. The 30% damage bonus does stack with the close to melee perk, giving you a nice 69% increase in damage. On top of that, it's fairly easy to proc. Now, the damage bonus with Triton Force can also stack with Radiance. So if you stack something like close to melee with Triton Vice with Radiance, your melee is going to be bumping up to 111%. Granted, you do have to do some extra work here to get to this point, like having to use close to melee, rock a solar subclass, but thankfully, we have a solar Glaive that can take advantage of close to melee called Judgment of Kelgrath. Now, on paper, these damage numbers sound pretty solid, and they are, don't get me wrong. 111% increase in damage is pretty nasty, but keep in mind, guys, this is stacking 3 buffs to get to that point. I do want to circle back, though, to Synthoceps, as this is a 50% damage increase, as well as when you're surrounded, so it is just better by default, and it also stacks with those other buffs that we mentioned above, such as close to melee, Radiant, which actually comes out to 143% increase in your Glaive melee damage. So yeah, it's cool and all that hunters have an exotic that works with their Glaives, but out the gate, melee versus melee, it's still worse than Titans with Synthoceps. But with that being said, that's not the only thing this exotic has to offer. As we mentioned, it also has the faster reload when surrounded, but I want to move on to the second half of its perk. Glaive melee final blows overflow a round to the magazine, and this can get you up to double the mag size, which is a pretty decent bonus as well. And Glaives typically have pretty slow reloads, so having to reload less is a plus. And if you do need to reload, as long as you are surrounded, that reload speed is going to be increased. Finally, though, the last part of this exotic trait Glaive says that projectile final blows detonate if the Glaive deals damage matching your subclass type. And this part of the trait is pretty interesting. And the detonation damage seems to be about 50% of the Glaive's projectile at the center, but does decrease in damage the further targets get away from it. Now, one of the first Glaives our team thought of trying was actually the long forgotten hunter exotic Edge of Concurrence. It's an arc Glaive that acts pretty similar to that of Trinity Ghoul with the perk Lightning Seeker, which reads, for your alternate weapon action, when your weapon energy is full, consume it before firing to make your next shot track targets across the ground, which unleashes chain lightning on impact. Now, since you have to have full Glaive energy first, it's not something that can be used as consistently as you could, say, for instance, Trinity Ghoul, but it's still pretty good paired with this build. We also have some great arc perks in our artifact mod this season, such as Electric Armor, where staying amplified longer while your arc subclass is equipped, Amped Up being amplified grants you damage resistance, and Shock and Awe, where arc final blows while you're amplified summon a burst of lightning that damages and jolts targets. And then on top of that, we do have Unstoppable Glaives for this season. Now, the idea here is to make sure you are on your arc subclass so that you can take advantage of the detonation from the Glaive final blow. Now, keep in mind, this does not do just a ton of damage. It's not going to kill a major, but it can certainly help with ad clearing, especially paired with the Lightning Seeker perk found on Edge of Concurrence. Now, another Glaive we tried out that worked well was last season's ritual weapon, Ecliptic Distaff. This Glaive is a great pick because, for one, it comes with close to melee. As we talked before, if you want to take advantage of that 69% damage buff for the melee, but if you prefer to actually shoot your Glaives, the other perk option we have is Destabilizing Rounds, where final blows cause nearby targets to become volatile. Of course, since this Glaive is void, you'll want to run Night Stalker, but the reason this combo pairs so well together is once you kill that first target and make nearby targets volatile, after that, the detonation from the Glaive projectile will go off, killing those enemies affected by volatile, which then further spreads more volatile to even more enemies. And it can also proc Stylish Executioner, as well as making it a very solid ad clear option. And this is probably my favorite pairing with this exotic, as in Void Surge environments, this really pops off. Now, the benefit from this exotic exotic also works on Winterbite. But again, it's not really going to give you anything substantial to make Winterbite meta, and nobody wants to waste their heavy ammo on clearing ats. Now going over to our PvP performance, Triton's Vice does work in PvP. Unfortunately though, it's nothing crazy. Base melee in PvP from a Glaive does 68 damage. Triton's Vice proceeds to proc and does a whopping 74 damage. I know. Now the Glaive projectile explosion does 101 damage, but the further the enemy is away from that detonation, the less damage it does. There could be a play to be made with the detonation inside of PvP, but you would really need to be in a situation where enemy teams is just constantly grouping up together in order to receive that full damage. Now that we have a chance to talk about what this exotic does and some of the build ideas we've been trying, I do want to talk about the shortcomings of this exotic though, which is really bizarre to me considering how many Glaives we have actually received over the past 2 seasons. Bungie is literally raining Glaives on us. They're like, here's another, and another, and another. Oh, but wait, they suck. And believe me, I am comparing this to what we were doing previously with Glaives, and I guess I just didn't realize how good we had it at the time. They're just underwhelming at this point with our current builds, which makes us all question, when are we ever really going to use any of these Glaives in in-game content? I had every intention of using Winterbite day 1 against Nezarec, but of course, it got disabled for good reason. Its projectile was busted, but its melee damage was what I wanted to use it for. And the combination of different Glaives would have worked so well here with this exotic if Bungie just amped things up. Don't get me wrong, this exotic can be good for ad clearing, and that extra detonation from projectile kills are nice to look at, but there are a lot of really good weapons for ad clearing. Honestly, a lot of better weapons. Secondly, if you're looking for just straight melee damage, then Synthoceps, despite it being so nerfed, is still better. And I know Bungie's answer to this is because the projectile portion gets buffed. So I don't know what's really shifted with Bungie and Glaives. Maybe it's because Bungie has intentions of putting us in a sword meta. They've talked about they're going to be reworking swords and that they are going to be useful in in-game content. And maybe Glaives were just too in the way, which makes me wonder, why the hell do you give us 1,000 freaking Glaives? Hell, even the Trials weapon is a Glaive. But even if we could use those same builds, most of those previous Glaive builds were all surrounding Synthoceps, which means it can only be utilized on Titans. For once here, Hunters could have utilized Glaives in a very lethal but nimble way, which is the direct opposite of how Titans use them. So I think at this point you understand where I sit on Glaives. I want them to be good. I like them. It took me a little bit to get around to them, but when I finally did start using Glaives, I fell in love. And soon after, Bungie destroyed them. I yawed so many things to death with my Glaive, and I felt like this would have been something quite entertaining to do on a Hunter. And before somebody jumps up and says, no, Cross, the melee identity is a Titan identity. Listen, I'm a Titan main, and yes, I do like running around fisting all of my enemies to death, but have you not seen the melee output that an Arc Hunter could put out? Liar's Handshake surpassed us, surpassed Titans. And yes, it hurt. I remember making the build way back when, but at the same time, it was beautiful. I love seeing potent things, and this was an opportunity here for Bungie to really make this exotic potent. Now, will it be potent in the future? Well, you saw the exotic reworks this past season. It's probably gonna happen. Bungie's probably gonna give it some love, but I don't expect anything to happen until after the big sword rework. Again, it's supposed to be a massive overhaul to swords. With that being said though, I'm still gonna keep this exotic. You never know what's gonna happen. I definitely wouldn't go out of your way to like focus exotic armor pieces for this one. There are other better exotics out there and other better builds, but for the time being, it's still worth keeping at least one of these in your vault just in case. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.